Right, let's turn this on.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Simone McKinney, WTOC's digital anchor and reporter. In just a moment, we're going to take you to the Leilani Simon trial, which is ongoing right now. One editor's note before we do get started. This is what you're about to see is on a 30-minute delay at request of the judge. The judge has requested that if we do live stream, we need to delay it by 30 minutes to ensure anything that doesn't need to go out on the live stream doesn't happen. So if it does, we will put up a screen so that you won't be able to see, but opening statements have begun and we will take that live right now. We're taking you live to the Leilani Simon trial.
All right, would you please bring in Ms. Simon? All right, good morning, Ms. Simon. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are now on the record in SPCR 22-03364J6, the State of Georgia versus Leilani Marie Simon. Ms. Simon is at counsel table. She is represented by her attorneys, Martin Hilliard and Robert Purse. The State of Georgia is represented by AUSA Tim Dean, Assistant District Attorney Jenny Parker, as well as Detective Marion Lemons. Is the state ready to proceed?
The state is ready, Your Honor.
Is the defense ready to proceed?
The defense is ready, Your Honor, and at this point in time, the defense would invoke the rule of sequestration.
Okay. And with that, all witnesses shall remain outside the courtroom except when you are personally called to testify. All witnesses shall not discuss the case with other witnesses or with the parties or with anyone else until the evidence is concluded or you've been excused from appearance. Are there any witnesses other than the detective present at this time?
There should not be, Your Honor. As to the detective, just to make the record clear, I will make the motion to have her exempted from the rule of sequestration. She is the state's designated representative in this case, and her presence throughout the trial will be essential for the orderly presentation of the evidence.
Thank you. Any objection?
Your Honor, I always lodge an objection to that since we've invoked the rule of sequestration, but I understand that is in fact what Georgia law is. So I note my objection for the record.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Hilliard. With that, is there anything that we need to take up before bringing in the jury and swearing them in?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Please bring in the jury.
Jury's entering.
I'm gonna do the panel.
right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please have a seat. Everyone else in the courtroom as well, please have a seat. All right. First of all, good morning to you. Thank you for being here. I know last week wasn't easy, and starting out your week like this doesn't make it any easier. There are a couple of things I want to ask you. When you left, I asked you not to have any contact with anyone about the case, don't discuss the case, don't do any research, don't avoid the media. If you are in the room when something starts, please leave. Has anyone have any issues with those instructions?
No, ma'am.
Very good. And with that, you will now be sworn as jurors.
Good morning. Please stand and raise your right hand. You shall well and truly try the issues formed upon this bill of indictment between the state of Georgia versus Leilani Marie Simon, who is charged with the offenses of malice murder, felony murder 2 counts, concealing the death of another, false report of a crime, making a false statement 14 counts, and a true verdict give according to the evidence, so help you God. Please respond with I will.
I will.
You may be seated.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to jump right in.
We're going to have to redo that. One of the jurors was missing.
Oh, my. Okay, ma'am, you come on down. Thank you, Mr. Hilliard, for noticing that. Good morning. Okay, let's do that again.
Raise your right hands. You shall well and truly try the issues formed upon this bill of indictment between the state of Georgia versus Leilani Marie Simon, who is charged with the offenses of malice murder, felony murder 2 counts, concealing the death of another, false report of a crime, making false statements 14 counts, and a true verdict give according to the evidence, so help you God. Please respond with I will.
I will.
You may be seated.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started right away. The first thing I'm going to do is give you some preliminary instructions. I have asked the bailiff to provide you with pens and notepads for your use during trial. You may take notes, but you are not required to do so. If you decide to take notes, please remember that note-taking should not divert you from paying full attention to the evidence and evaluating witnesses' credibility. Your observations of the witness during their testimony can be vital to your determination of the believability of their testimony. The notes, until you retire, the notes are there to assist you in remembering what you have. And I'm taking a look at my notes, and my notes need to be a little bit different from what they are. All right. I don't have everything that I need. So this is a wonderful way to start out. We're going to take already a 5-minute break. Okay, so you take the jurors to the deliberation room.
Jurors exiting. clear, Judge.
Thank you. We're going to take a 5-minute break. The court is to refer to her notes and to essentially read from the notes. I have big gaps in my notes that I didn't realize until now. So we'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you. We're in recess. Yeah.
All right, if you are joining us on this live stream, you're watching the opening statements of the Leilani Simon trial. We know that Leilani Simon is accused of killing her son Quentin Simon on October 5th. This is 2 years later. She's now facing 19 charges that include malice murder, felony murder, concealing the death of another, and making false statements. Just then, you heard the judge request a 5-minute break. She mentioned that her notes did not look the way that they should, so we are going to wait for that trial to continue, and once it does, we'll send an alert for you to check back in on this live stream. So stay tuned. They should be returning shortly.
counsel are at their tables. Ms. Simon is at the table with her attorney. So let's please bring in the jurors.
Jurors in the hearing.
Jurors entering.
All right, thank you. As you come to your seats, please feel free to have a seat. And let the record reflect that all the jurors have been seated. We'll now move into the preliminary instructions. Before I do that, there was a juror who didn't make it out for the first swearing, and I just wanted to ask you the question that I've asked everyone else. Have you done any research? Have you talked to anyone about the case? Have you watched any news media? Okay, so you've been able to follow the court's instructions to not discuss this case with anyone, nor do research. All right, thank you very much. All right. And your number? 7. Okay, and that is juror number 7. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, moving on, I'm going to get back to the pens and notepads that you have for your use during the trial. You may make notes, but you're not required to do so. If you decide to take notes, please remember that note-taking should not divert you from paying full attention to the evidence and to evaluating witness credibility. Your observations of the witness during their testimony can be vital to your determination to the believability of their testimony. The notes that you take are for your use only and are not to be shared with anyone until you begin deliberation with your fellow jurors. During deliberation, you should rely on your own recollection of the proceedings, but you may consult the notes of other jurors if you wish. Do not be influenced by the notes of others unless their notes help you in determining your own independent recollection. Notes are not entitled to any greater weight than the recollection or impression of each juror as to what evidence that may have been presented. After the trial is over, the notes will be destroyed and they will be collected and destroyed. And at this time, please write your name on the front sheet of paper in the pad and make no further notes on the front sheet. That way, no other person can see your notes if your pad should be seen by another person. The law requires that you decide this case solely on evidence presented in this courtroom. This means that during the trial, you must not conduct any independent research about this case, the matters in the case, or any individuals involved in the case. In other words, you should not consult dictionaries or reference materials, search the internet, websites or blogs, or use any other electronic tools to obtain information about this case or to help you decide the case. Please do not try to find out information from any source outside of the confines of the courtroom, to include media of any sort or online research. The bailiffs have been instructed to collect your cell phones, tablets, and laptops during the proceedings. You may want to leave those in your vehicle. If they collect them, they'll be sure to give them back to you at the end of the day and on breaks as well. Until you retire to deliberate, you may not discuss this case with anyone, even your fellow jurors. After you retire to deliberate, you may begin discussing the case with your fellow jurors, but you cannot discuss the case with anyone else until you have returned a verdict and the case is at an end. I hope that for all of you, this case is interesting and noteworthy. I know that many of you use tools or technology in your daily life, but you may not do so in connection with your service as a juror. You also must not talk to anyone about this case or use electronic tools to communicate with anyone about the case. This includes your family members and friends. You may not communicate with anyone about the case or your jury service via internet, text messaging, email, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and on and on and on. You cannot use any social networking websites to communicate anything about this case. I cannot stress strongly enough that communication via electronic devices is prohibited. So at this time, you may seat in any of the seats in the jury box during the trial. During the voir dire process, we ask that you sit in specific seats for identification purposes. However, there is no need to do so during the trial itself. If you need anything while in the jury room, you may knock at the door to notify the bailiff that you wish to communicate with the court. I would then give you instructions on how this should be done, depending on the stage of the trial and the nature of the request. So I'm going to give you an overview of the criminal law and trial procedure that will apply in this case to give you a framework. A crime is a violation of a statute of this state in which there shall be a union or joint operation of act and intention. That is, a crime is committed when a person violates a statute of this state by acting as prohibited, while at the same time he has a criminal intention and no other defense excuses the conduct. A person will not be presumed to act with criminal intention. However, the jury may find such intention upon the consideration of words, conduct, demeanor, motive, and all other circumstances connected with the act for which the accused is prosecuted. The state cannot bring a person accused of a felony to trial unless the grand jury has first indicted that person. Grand jurors do not try criminal cases. They ordinarily only hear from witnesses for the state. When a criminal case is tried, the defendant has pled not guilty to the indictment. This plea of not guilty denies every essential allegation of the indictment and forms the issue or the question that you as a trial jury will decide. The indictment and the plea of not guilty to it are not evidence, and you should not consider them as evidence. Every person is presumed innocent until proved guilty. No person shall be convicted of a crime unless each element of the crime is proved beyond a reasonable doubt. The state has the burden to prove each essential element of each crime charged beyond a reasonable doubt. In this state, a defendant on trial may or may not testify as she chooses. If she does testify, you would judge her credibility by the same test applied to any other witness. If the defendant does not testify, which is her absolute constitutional right, you shall not draw any inference of guilt from this decision, and her decision, her election not to testify, may not in any way affect your verdict. Moreover, the defendant has no duty to call any witnesses or present any evidence during a trial. If she calls no witnesses or presents no evidence, you may not derive any inference of guilt from such failure to produce evidence. In such case, you decide guilt on whether the state's evidence proves the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Under our system, I have the duty as a trial judge to decide the law that applies to a case and to instruct you on it. You have the duty as a jury to decide the facts in a case from which the evidence and reasonable inferences arising from the evidence. I'm going to say that again. I don't think that was too clear. You have the duty as the jury to decide the facts in a case from the evidence and reasonable inferences arising from the evidence. In reaching your verdict, you also have the duty to apply the law to those facts. You decide the facts from the evidence. The evidence has two parts: testimony of witnesses and exhibits. A witness means anyone who testifies in person from the stand. The exhibits are those documents, objects, or photos that the court admits into evidence. You will have most of the exhibits with you in the jury room while you deliberate. However, there are some exhibits that cannot be sent to the jury room, so it will be important that you pay close attention to all of the exhibits admitted during the trial. I caution you that what the lawyers say during a trial is not evidence. Also, anything that I might do or say is not evidence. I have no leanings at all in these cases. My only interest is to have the cases tried fairly and according to the law and the constitutions of the state and of the United States. You are the exclusive judges of the witnesses' credibility. That is, you decide the truthfulness and reasonableness of their testimony. You may believe or disbelieve all or any part of the testimony of any witness. You have the duty to decide what testimony is worthy of belief and what testimony is not worthy of belief. You should lay aside any preconceived notions and not decide a witness's credibility until the witness has testified. Rules of law govern what the court admits into evidence. If an attorney objects to the admission of evidence, then I must rule on the objection and decide whether you can consider such evidence. You should understand that there are two ways that I can respond to an objection. If I say sustained, that means that I granted the objection and you should not consider the objected to evidence. If I say overruled, then that means I did not grant the objection and you may consider the objected to evidence. You should not infer or assume anything from either a lawyer's objections or the court's rulings. During this trial, the court will have to consider some procedures outside your presence. When that occurs, I shall excuse you to the jury room for a time. During these periods, the court will do its best to handle the matter as promptly as the law permits. On the other hand, I will appreciate your patience when this occurs. Now, the procedure in a criminal trial is generally as follows. First, the attorneys for both sides may make an opening statement to you. The opening statement is not evidence itself. Remember that what the lawyers say is not evidence. However, it is a preview or an outline of what they expect the evidence to show. Following the opening statements, the state has the opportunity to present evidence to support the charges against the defendant. And the defendant has the opportunity, if she so elects, to present evidence in her defense. This part of a trial is called the party's case in chief. In the state's case in chief, the state calls its witnesses and introduces any exhibits. When these witnesses testify, they may be cross-examined by the defendant. When the state has presented all of its evidence, the state will rest its case. Then, if the defendant elects to present any evidence, the defendant may call her witnesses and introduce her exhibits. Of course, when these witnesses testify, they may be cross-examined by the state. However, the defendant has no duty to testify or present any evidence whatsoever. After the presentation of the evidence, the attorneys may make a closing argument to you. At this time, the attorneys will try to persuade you to decide the case in their favor. Following the closing arguments, I will charge or instruct you more specifically on the law that directly applies to this case. Then you will retire to the jury room to deliberate and reach your verdict. This is not an exhaustive description of the criminal procedure, but hopefully it will give you an overview that will help you to understand the trial as it proceeds. It is your duty to follow any instructions that the court may give you during a case. Please remember to listen carefully to all the evidence. Don't jump to conclusions before the parties present all the evidence. Also, please remember that during a trial, it would be improper for you to discuss the case with anyone or to allow anyone to discuss the case with you or in your presence or within your hearing. This applies even to discussions among yourselves in the jury room or elsewhere before actual deliberations begin. Also, during a trial, you should not communicate with the parties, the attorneys, or any of the witnesses. Under this rule, you should not engage even in social greetings or small talk with anyone involved in this case. I've had situations where a juror saw a party or attorney in the parking lot during a break and was offended that the party or attorney did not speak back to the juror. They're not being rude. Please understand that these attorneys and parties should not speak with you as the trial progresses and will likely avoid speaking with you to ensure that there is no appearance of impropriety. So please do not take offense to their failure to speak with you as we go forward for the trial in the coming days. This procedure will protect you not only from wrongdoing, but from the appearance of wrongdoing. And these restrictions also apply to the friends and family members of interested parties. During these trials, the court will not require that you be kept together except during breaks and during the meals. There have been special arrangements made for that, so you will learn more about that as we go. Today is the day, I believe, that you will go out to lunch, but you will go out together. When you return to the courthouse from any adjournment for meals or from the night, please go directly to the jury assembly room. Is that where the jurors set up? Jury assembly room? Okay. This will lessen the opportunity for an accidental meeting with a person that you may not know is involved in the case. There is coverage, media coverage of this case, and you should be careful not to consider it. Do not independently investigate any facts or visit any scenes depicted in the evidence. Do not independently research any law concerning this case. You are prohibited from, again, doing any research on the internet. Can you tell how important it is? I keep saying it. It's here for a reason. So I've said it several times now. It is important that you consider only the evidence that you hear and see within the courtroom. That concludes my preliminary instructions. So at this time, I will turn first to the state. Is the state ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
And the defense is ready to proceed.
The defense is ready, Your Honor.
We'll begin now with opening statements.
Thank you. at about a year and a half old, a little bit over that, 20 months. Like all children, he was blameless, he was innocent, and he was beautiful. And like all children, he was totally defenseless, totally and completely dependent on the adults in his life to take care of him and to look out for his safety. And the evidence in this case will show that the defendant violated that trust, that most basic, sacred trust of a parent, in the most horrible way. In the middle of the night, she killed him, her own son, got in her car with his body, drove to a dumpster, and threw him away like a piece of trash. She would go home, go to sleep like everything was normal, and wake up the next morning and report it to the police as an abduction. I woke up, my front door was open, and my child is missing. Now the story started to fall apart pretty quickly because of good, solid police work. But she would go on to tell a series of evolving lies over several weeks, only moving from one lie to the next as the police picked apart the first lie and presented her with the evidence that made the first lie untenable. So now it's time to move on to lie number 2, and 3, and 4. And as they're doing this with her, they're also searching for his body, which they ultimately discover about 6 weeks after his disappearance in a local landfill, in pieces, unfortunately. And as a result of all of that police work and investigative efforts, which I think you'll be quite proud of when you hear about them in detail, the defendant is charged with his murder. So that's sort of the 50,000-foot view, the bluff, the bottom line up front for the military folks here. A little more detail on what happened, what the evidence will show. The 2 days that we're primarily concerned with here are October 4th and 5th of 2022, specifically the night of October 4th, moving into the morning of October 5th. Now, at that time, and I'll try to go slow for those of you who are taking notes. At that time, the defendant is living here on the west side of Savannah, jurisdiction of the Chatham County Police Department, in this house that's roughly in the center, with an in-ground swimming pool in the back. It's on Buckhalter Road, 535 Buckhalter Road. She had most recently lived in North Carolina, where she had met and lived with her most recent boyfriend, Daniel Youngkin, who you'll hear about. And some months before October of 2022, they had moved down and were living in this house at 535 Buckhalter. Now the house belonged to the defendant's mother, Billy Joe Howell, who you see here, and her husband, Thomas Howell, who is not the defendant's father, but is her stepfather. Also living in the house at that time is the defendant's brother, Paul Simon. They have the same mother and the same father. And Daniel Youngkin, her boyfriend from North Carolina, and the defendant's 3 children. October of 2022, she has 3 children by 3 different men. The oldest is Zane Wharton. I think you'll hear was roughly about 3 years old at the time. Zane has been through a lot with her. He's her firstborn son, and I expect you'll hear testimony that she considered him her ride or die. That's her guy. Sky Youngkin is an infant on the far right there. That is her youngest child by Daniel Youngkin. And in the middle was Quentin. Quentin was her child by a man named Henry Bubba Moss Jr. You'll hear that she'd had kind of a tumultuous relationship with Mr. Moss, that they had split before she even knew she was pregnant with Quentin, and that he initially didn't even believe that she was pregnant when she told him, and that he was never a part of Quentin's life at all. And I expect you'll hear some testimony about the way that background influenced the way that she treated Quentin. But, you're supposed to love all your kids equally. You're supposed to treat them all the same. I expect you'll hear some testimony that didn't happen. That she treated Quentin differently, and not in a good way. Here's the house from the street. The master bedroom where defendant's mother, Billy Joe Howell, and her stepfather, Thomas Howell, lived is over here in the two-story portion of the house, but on the first floor. Brother Paul Simon's bedroom is upstairs, and you'll hear in one of the defendant's interviews, she'll say, when you're up in that room, you can't really hear anything that's going on downstairs. It's kind of its own layer up there. Now, the defendant, Daniel, and the three children lived in a bedroom right through this front door. I think there was some sort of addition or something on the house at one point. This bedroom that they live in appears to be like a converted one-time living room or something like that. If you step through that front door, this is what you see. You see a couch in the foreground. You see a desk behind that. And then on the far wall there, you see a bed. That's the defendant and Daniel Youngkin's bed. If you pan to the right, you'll see a closet door here. And then it's hard to make out in this picture, but beyond this closet door is a door into a bathroom that then feeds into the dining room. And that is the only way to get from this room to the main body of the house. You see a race car bed there. That's where Zane slept. We further pan to the right. You can see that race car bed completely, and you see a projector on the wall, evidently for watching movies or something while you're sitting on the couch. And then if you pan into that right-hand corner, you see this pack and play. That's immediately to the right as you go in that front door. And that's where Quentin slept. That was Quentin's bed. Now, that sort of sets the scene as to who's living in this house and where they're sleeping. Before we come back to the morning of October 4th, I want to talk to you about what the evidence is going to show as far as what's the biggest thing going on in the defendant's life. And the biggest thing going on in her life in the months, days leading up to October 4th is the status of her relationship with Daniel Youngkin. Things are not good. She is feeling unloved, undesired, ignored. And I'll show you a couple of text messages taken from her phone by the investigators that show this. Now, this is kind of small on here. It's kind of bright, so I'll read it for you for those of you who can't see. Some of you may be able to read it. Perhaps not all of you can. This is July of 2022. I want to feel beautiful, not barely average. I want to feel loved and not just liked. I want to feel wanted, not just tolerated. I want to be able to look at you and know it's just me not wondering how many others there are. I want to feel like my body is worth showing off, not like it's just been trashed from having 3 kids. I want to feel the way you made me feel in the beginning, like I'm treasured and safe, not like I'm just here because you really don't have a choice. And you'll see quite a number of messages like this. It's basically an unbroken string of text messages all the way up to the day that she kills Quentin. August 6th, yeah, go get yourself some ass. I know mine is not good enough. Never was, never will be. September 10th, you're the reason I'm angry every day. You're the reason I'm depressed, why I feel the way I do about myself. Now, this is not a minor thing for her. I told you it's probably the biggest thing emotionally going on in her life. The way that she perceives herself to be being treated by Daniel, and perhaps to some degree actually was being treated by him. It's at least how she feels. This is such a big deal for her that with her phone, at one point she filmed something that can only be described as a digital suicide note. All right, she's in the car, and you'll hear her at the end say, I've got to go, I made it to the river. She's in her car, evidently contemplating driving her car into a river and ending her life. And she starts out saying goodbye to her children. She has some kind words to say about Zane. She has some kind, loving words to say about Sky. You might perceive that she momentarily kind of seems to be at a loss for what exactly to say about Quentin, our victim, the middle child. And then she goes on to explain that the message is clearly addressed to Danny. She goes on to attribute what she's about to do to the way that Danny has treated her. Now, this is a 4-minute some video. It's a little long for an opening statement, but we're going to watch the whole thing. And we're going to watch the whole thing because it's an important window into her state of mind at this stage in time. This video was filmed in August of 2022, but the evidence in terms of the text messages and her statements will show that nothing really changed between when this video was filmed and October 4th of 2022. So with that preview, I'll play this for you now.
To Sky, Zane, and Quentin. Mama tried. Your mama's not here no more because she doesn't love you. I do. I can't love myself. If I can't love myself, how can I love y'all? I have tried over and over and
river now by Danny. So that's where she was at. This is her emotional state in the summer, fall of 2022. That brings us back to October 4th. And here I'll give you sort of an overview of what the evidence is going to show us to the sequence of events of that day. Now, the first thing to establish is that on the relevant dates here, Billy Joe Howell, the defendant's mother, and Thomas Howell, her stepdad, are out of town. They're not in town. They're not in the house. They are sort of out of play. I expect that will be undisputed. So that leaves in the house Paul, the defendant, Danny, and the three children, Zane, Quentin, and Scott. In the morning of October 4th, quite early in the morning, in fact, the defendant and Danny take the three children to babysitter Michelle McCardle and her two teenage daughters that live on the same street. They live like right across the street on Buckhalter. And it says babysitter up here, and I've called her the babysitter, but really you'll hear from Michelle, one of her daughters. And it comes across more like they're almost like a second family or a substitute family for these kids because of the parental shortcomings at 535 Buckhalter. So the evidence might show that babysitter kind of undersells it a little bit. And the child care arrangement was this. At this point in time, Danny and the defendant are working at a warehouse in Port Wentworth, unloading, loading boxes. They're carrying boxes at a warehouse in Port Wentworth. And their shift starts at 6 a.m. They're working the 6 a.m. shift. So early in the morning, on the way to work, they'll drop off the three children with Michelle and with her two teenage daughters. And so they do that. And they both go to work. They clock in at essentially the exact same time, a little after 6 a.m. on October 4th. Now they clock out less than 2 hours later. And the reason they do that is the defendant is experiencing some kind of dental issue. She has a tooth that's bothering her, and it needs to come out. And so they clock out right around 8 o'clock, just before 8 o'clock in the morning, and they go to some type of like emergency dental clinic or walk-in dental clinic. And she gets a tooth pulled. These are some pictures, selfies she took of herself in the dentist chair. And you can see the side of her mouth on the left side there, I think, is kind of swollen. She sent these to Daniel, Young, and Danny, who was sitting out in the waiting room waiting for her. And so after this, they do not go back to work. They go home. And the rest of the waking hours of the day are pretty normal. They get some lunch. They relax. Her mouth is bothering her. She's tired. She's sore. And eventually, at about 4:30 in the afternoon, they go and they pick up the three kids from the babysitter, from Michelle, and they bring them home. So, at that point, Danny, the defendant, and the three kids are in the house. Now, Paul, he worked at the same warehouse, but he worked a later shift, and you'll hear what it is. It's something like 2 p.m. to late at night, around 10 or so. That was Paul's shift. So same place, different shift. So he's not there in the afternoon. Now they're there. They do dinner. They do bath time. They put the kids down. Quentin in his pack and play. I think you'll hear testimony or a statement from the defendant that Sky, the infant, slept on that couch that we looked at, and Zane in the race car bed. And I think it'll be undisputed, and I expect that it'll be undisputed that, at around 10 p.m., Quentin is fine. He's just in his crib, in his pack and play for bedtime. Okay. And what happens at this point sets off a chain of events that goes over the next couple hours and results in tragedy. And that is that the defendant and Daniel have yet another argument about how he's treating her. This is sometime a little after 10 p.m. And that this is something she told to detectives eventually in some of her interviews. About how he doesn't want her, he doesn't want to touch her, he's not feeling desire for her like he used to. And we've already talked about this is a major trigger for her. This is the biggest emotional issue going on in her life, and it's significant. It drove her to the brink in the video that you've watched. This is not a minor thing for her. And so she leaves the house after 10 p.m. on the first of two trips that you'll hear a lot about in this trial, and that she didn't really want to talk about, at least truthfully, with investigators. And that first trip is to the drug dealer. She says that she left so that things wouldn't escalate between her and Danny. She was upset. That's her word. So it wouldn't escalate. The first place she goes is this Circle K. And I should have pointed out that you can see her getting out of the car. That's at 10:29 p.m. So about 10:30. I'll back up and you can see her getting out of her Dodge Journey with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She's not in a good state. Anyway, 10:30, she goes into the Circle K. She buys a couple convenience store items. And then she texts Danny. He's got her saved in his phone as Lanny Baby. She texts him, I'm going to run to 204, I guess. That's at 10:32, immediately after she leaves the Circle K. She might still be in the parking lot for all I know. And 204 is an area you'll hear about in this case. It's sort of it's shorthand for our drug dealer. I'm going to run to our drug dealer. This is Highway 204 is what this is a reference to. And their drug dealer lives on a street right off 204. So she's going to get drugs to try to make herself feel better. This is a screenshot of some GPS plots from her phone that the police eventually made after getting into her phone. You can see Highway 204 here. And this red kind of blob up here is a series of GPS points showing that she's at the drug dealer's house on Arkwright Lane from about 10:45 p.m. to 10:55. And she's scoring drugs to use that night because she doesn't like the way she's feeling. This is some information exported from her cell phone extraction showing that while she was there, at 10:49, she made an $80 Cash App payment to a Timothy Weston, who is her drug dealer, or at least one of them. While she's gone, Paul gets home. He had clocked out at 9:56 p.m. And I think he will say that he took him a minute to get home because he was smoking a blunt in the parking lot or something like that. You're going to hear a lot about drug use in this case. And he gets home while the defendant is still out on this trip to the drug dealer. And he'll tell you that when he got home, he went in and said hey to Danny. And he saw the kids, he saw Quentin in his crib, in his pack and play. Quentin was fine. He even interacted with him a little bit. He'll tell you what it was. Hey, little man, how's it going? And he sees that Quentin is okay, he's fine. May not be completely asleep yet, but he's there and he's okay. Now, by 10 after 11, this is another GPS screenshot. It's hard to make out on this TV. But this is, by 10 after 11, she's got a bunch of GPS points hitting at the house on Buckhalter Road. And this is just to signify that this is around when she gets home. 10 after 11. And so she's home at that point. Paul is upstairs in his bedroom, going to sleep, kind of secluded from the rest of the family. And Danny eventually goes to sleep as well. And you'll hear her say this to the investigators, that she was the only one up and active in the middle of the night, in the hours leading up towards 1 a.m. Danny is sleeping because he's going to get up and go to work in the morning. He has to get up at like sometime between 5 and 5:30 to go to work. And Paul was sleeping as well because he just got off work. He's tired. And you'll hear her say that I was the only one up and about. My tooth was hurting. I couldn't sleep. What she's doing is she's going on a bender. You'll hear her admit to this eventually. She didn't want to talk about it initially, but you'll hear that she eventually acknowledged that she was up kind of frantically using drugs for an extended period of time while everybody else in the house is asleep and out of play. You'll hear her talk about it. I would hit a line. I would go outside. I would smoke a blunt to kind of bring myself down. Maybe smoke a cigarette. Then I'd hit another line and repeat the cycle. So she's in her house by herself, physically uncomfortable because of her dental issue, emotionally wrecked because of what's going on with her and Danny that's resurfaced again this night. Well, the resurface is probably not the way to put it because it's just an ever-present problem for her. And this is a bad situation. Right? This is a volatile, dangerous situation. And that's because you'll hear something that she later said during the investigation on a recorded call, on a recorded phone call to Daniel, who was cooperating with the police and trying to help them gain information about the effect that cocaine has on her. It's not just fun for her. You'll hear her say that it makes her angry and impulsive.
I will not touch. I will not touch cocaine. I become angry and impulsive when I'm on it.
And so those are the conditions. She's up all alone, physically uncomfortable, emotionally unhappy, unstable to some degree. And around 1 a.m. probably, she kills Quentin. Now I'm going to focus on the what she did and when things happened. And probably in closing argument when all the evidence is in, we'll talk to you a little bit more about the why. The why exactly in that moment did she do this? But for now, I want you to just understand the sequence of events and what happened when. She takes his body and puts it in Dodge Journey, Georgia tag TEN 9300. And she begins the cover-up. The cover-up is not just the lies to the police. The cover-up starts immediately. A little after 1 a.m., she drives down Buckhalter Road, which turns to the right here, but it's still Buckhalter Road at that turn. And comes into Ogeechee Road right here. And she pulls into this mobile home plaza. It's right here. Mostly what you're seeing is trees, but there are mobile homes in here. This is Azalea Mobile Home Plaza. And there's a convenient stand of dumpsters sort of hidden away under some tree cover in the tree line there. And she throws Quentin's body away like a piece of trash at about 1:17 in the morning. She drives home. This is another export from her phone, showing that her phone was locked from 2:01 in the morning until 9:13 in the morning. And this is just kind of a shorthand way of saying that's roughly about the time she eventually goes to sleep, and her phone is inactive. Now Danny wakes up for work a little after 5, and he tries to wake her up to go to work. She's supposed to go to work with him. Remember, they work the same shift. She has been up all night doing drugs, and he's been, responsibly sleeping, so he's able to get up for work. And he cannot wake her up. She will not wake up. And at this point, he's trying to get out of the house to go to work. And he believes that all 3 children are there. He does not go over and check the packet plane. He doesn't even know that Quentin is gone. You saw in those pictures the packet plane is all the way across the room in the far corner. It's not right next to the closet. It's not right next to the bathroom. He can't wake her up to go to work, and he's annoyed by this because this is, I think he may tell you it's not the first time this has happened. And they are kind of tight on money. They are trying to make money to either put a down payment on a house or a security deposit on an apartment so they don't have to live with their mom anymore. And he'll tell you that he was frustrated by this. You're not going to get up and come to work and make money. And his decision at this time was to say, well, okay, if you're not going to come to work and make money, we're not going to spend money on a babysitter today. Because they pay her every day, Michelle. And so he texts Michelle, hey, the kids are going to stay here with her today, Miss Michelle, at 5:20 in the morning. She says, okay. And the reason for that is his thought is, look, if you're not going to get up and make money, you can stay here and watch the kids. Wake up and find these kids are still here. You can deal with them. They're yours. So he goes to work, and he clocks in at 6:11. 6 a.m., 6:11 a.m. And he will clock out at 9:15, a little over 3 hours later. And the reason that he clocks out at 9:15 is that at 9:14, 1 minute before the clock out, he gets a call from the defendant who's got him saved in her phone as King. And he's got the 910 area code. That's North Carolina, where he's from. Now, this is a 21-minute call. And she calls him, and the cover-up, initially I said, the cover-up starts with covering this up to him. Before the police ever, she covered it up to the police, but before they ever even get involved, she's covering it up to Danny. She calls him and she tells him that she woke up, the front door was open, and Quentin was gone. And he would run out to his car, leave work, and come home, and stay on the line with her for 21 minutes. Police went to the warehouse that they work at, and they got some video footage to see, well, what did Danny look like when he was leaving the house, leaving work, having gotten this call? And this video shows him running out. That's Danny running out of work. You'll hear from his boss, a fellow named David Mullins, that David ran into Danny in the parking lot. Danny's running out. Dave is just pulling in and getting to work. And they briefly encounter one another. And Dave will tell you, he looked genuinely upset. He was for real crying, tears coming down his face. Danny does not know what is going on. He knows what he's hearing from the defendant, and that's it. So he rushes home. And I'll tell you this. I told you the call to Danny was at 9:14. As he's on the way home, on this call with the defendant where she's telling him she woke up and the front door was open, these are ADT records. There's an ADT security system on this house. And it keeps track of when each door was open and closed, or just opened, or just closed, having been open. Police got these records. And you'll see that front door didn't open until 9:22 in the morning on October 5th. Now that's 6 minutes in, 6 or 8 minutes in to that call with Danny. And so what the evidence is going to show that she's on the phone with him saying, I woke up and the front door was open and Quentin was gone. it's during that phone call that she's opening the front door. So you'll hear that she's essentially tampering with evidence, tampering with the scene, staging the scene to fit with her story before the police ever become involved. Danny gets home. Somehow babysitter Michelle got wind that this was going on. Maybe she heard screaming or something. She'll tell you how she heard about this when she testifies. She comes over. Paul hears yelling, comes downstairs, and now everybody's there and they're looking for Quentin. And the defendant, of course, is the only person who knows where he actually is, and that's in a dumpster at Azalea Mobile Home Plaza. And they call 911, and here's what the defendant says.
Get my son! Get my little here outside! I'm looking over the front doors open and this place is empty, please!
Police show up a little before 10 a.m., and she repeats the same story to them. The evidence will show that that car that's like the furthest one, the most recent one that entered the driveway, is the babysitter's, Michelle's. She had pulled up and parked her white Pathfinder there. But in any case, the defendant repeats that story to the responding officers, and you'll hear from some of them.
I woke up about 10 o'clock. My husband was worried about 6, so within a 3-hour period, somehow the front door is unlocked and my son is not in his blanket.
Now, this is a missing child. So situations like this, it's all hands on deck. Everybody comes out. Forensics comes out. The forensics unit came out, had a drone up looking for Quentin. Patrol officers are being pulled from other beats, other areas of patrol, to canvass the area and look for Quentin in the woods. All sorts of people are coming. Most of the command staff for the Chatham County Police Department showed up because this is a big deal, and they take these things very seriously. One of the specialized units that responded after patrol officers had gotten there was the detectives for the Chatham County Police Department, CID, the Criminal Investigations Division. And the first detective there for CID is a guy you'll hear from, Sean Wilkins. Sean Wilkins shows up, and he's the one who conducts the first, what you call more like the first formal interview with the defendant. And most notable from that statement that he takes from her at this time is when she says she went to bed and when she says she got up. And you'll hear that she tells him, I went to bed around midnight and I got up around 9. She doesn't say anything at all about this trip to Azalea Mobile Home Plaza a little after 1 a.m. She doesn't want to talk about that because that's the trip that she took to get rid of Quentin's body. So here's her telling Wilkins, I went to bed around midnight and I got up around 9 a.m.
So when's the last time you saw your son?
When I went to bed last night.
And what time was that? Do you remember?
Around 12.
12? Okay.
12 when I went to bed. I had my wisdom teeth removed yesterday.
I'm sorry, that's
So I went to bed kind of late.
I get you. Listen, I had them out too.
So I got up this morning about 9.
About 9?
And my front door is open, so I went up and I shut it, not thinking about anything like that. And I look over and check my kids, and he was fine. All the rest were there. He was gone.
It's alright. It's alright.
Went to bed at midnight, woke up around 9. No mention of the Azalea trip. I told you there were 2 trips, 2:04 earlier in the night, 10:11. Trip number 2 is that Azalea trip, a little after 1 a.m. And she is totally omitting that. Now, all hands on deck, right? Missing child. There are detectives working on this case that aren't even out at the scene from the very beginning. One of them is a Chatham County police detective you'll hear from named Kiana Robbins. Kiana Robbins is at the Islands precinct, I think is where she was, on Johnny Mercer. Like, not anywhere close to here. But she's in her office, she's sitting at her computer. seeing if she can find some helpful information. This is a stock photo of what's called a flock camera. The flock system is a series of cameras that are set up around town at major intersections or along busy roads. And what they do is they snap a picture of the license plates of all the cars that drive by. And police can use these for a number of different things. One of the things they can use them for is, say you have somebody who flees from a traffic stop and actually gets away, and the police can't pursue them without undue danger. They can take that tag number of that individual, they can put it in the flock system and put like a lookout out for them. If that tag hits on any other cameras, it'll alert the police and they can try again and make the traffic stop. Another thing that the police can do, and what Detective Robbins did, was look up vehicles registered to the defendant. She finds that Dodge Journey that the defendant drove to dispose of Quentin's body, and she puts it into the flock system, looks it up in the database to see what, if any, flock cameras that vehicle has hit on anytime recently. And she sees that that car has been out late at night, driving around on trips that the defendant hasn't mentioned yet. She radios that information, or maybe calls via phone. This is the tag she looks up. That's the Dodge Journey in the driveway at the time of the police response. She calls Lieutenant Foster, who you'll hear from. This is after the defendant has told Wilkins that she went to bed at midnight and woke up at 9, and hasn't mentioned anything about the Orangeville trip or the Azalea trip. Foster goes up to her. He now has this information that this tag has been hidden on some flock cameras and seems to have been driving around during the night. And he goes up to her, and he's a lieutenant at this point, which is like kind of a managerial type position. He's, by this time, is the senior man on scene, I believe. But he has a background in investigations. He was with the Savannah Police Department, I think, at one point, in their violent crimes unit, investigating homicide. So he knows his way around an investigation. He knows how to do these sort of things. He goes up to her armed with this information about the flock hits at night. He wants to know what these trips were about. So he goes up to her and he asks her, "Hey, did you go anywhere last night?" And he's a savvy guy, so he's careful to tack on, like where the kidnapper could have followed you home. And she seems to know, the evidence will show that she seems to know that he knows something about this trip to Azalea that she took and has not mentioned to this point. And so she comes up with a story. It's not totally clear when she came up with it. But the story is that, that trip that I took away from my house shortly after 1 a.m., that was to go pick up Oragel from a friend at the Chevron. Now the Chevron is right next to Azalea Mobile Home Plaza. They're kind of right next to each other. And so that's her story as to what she was doing, driving to that location at that time. My tooth was bothering me. I didn't have any Oragel. I went to pick some up and got some from a friend. This is the first appearance of the Oragel story, which lasts for about a week or so, maybe a week and a half.
Did y'all go anywhere last night or yesterday with Baby? That maybe he could have followed you or something? Y'all didn't go anywhere? No, just maybe you yourself.
Yeah, I know. I took a tooth pulled yesterday, so I went to go to the Oregon. That was it.
2 o'clock yesterday afternoon?
No, like morning at mine, because I couldn't go to sleep.
Okay, so where'd you go?
Right up the road, right here, that Chevron. And my friend that I used to work with, she had Oregon because they didn't have me. I said, okay, I'm home.
Okay. Did you go anywhere else? Have you maybe been home? So when did you get home?
I can tell you exactly. What did you do too? I was home at 1:25.
1:25?
So I was gone for literally 12 minutes.
All right, so that's the story about what I was doing when I drove there. Now, I'll tell you this, she's trying to show them on her phone this trip on an app called Life 360. Life 360 kind of generally tracks your movements. You can join with your family, and they can see where you are and have been, and vice versa. You may be wondering, well, look, if this trip was so sinister in nature, why is she trying to show it to them on her phone? And you'll hear testimony that the reason that she was comfortable holding out her phone as corroboration for this trip to the Chevron is that, again, the Chevron and Azalea Mobile Home Plaza are right next to each other. And looking at the screen, you can't necessarily tell which one she's at. You can only tell that she's in the general area. So she believes that this kind of helps prove that I'm telling the truth about being at the Chevron. Now, the police would later pull very precise GPS data from the phone, like not just looking at the screen, but from the actual phone, that puts her not at the Chevron, but right at the dumpsters at Azalea, which are, I don't know, maybe 100 yards, 75 yards from the Chevron. But that's why she's holding the Life 360 out and saying, look, this helps me. So that's the first appearance of the Origel story, to explain the Azalea trip. The police take all three of the adults in the house. Eventually they say, we really need you to get Danny, Paul, and the defendant to the police station, sit them down for formal interviews, and just get like a complete sequence of the day from all three of these people. And the first interview with the defendant takes place in something that they call the lactation room or the nursing room. I think you sometimes also hear these things referred to as mothering rooms. And the reason for that is that Danny was in the single interview room that they have with the cameras wired up in the corners and all that. And this video is recorded on Detective Marion Lemon's phone. Now, by this time, this is a joint federal and local investigation. The FBI has shown up because they get involved in kidnappings, abduction cases. And what happens at headquarters is that they pair off teamwork. One FBI agent, one detective, and they each in a pair interview each of these people. And so Detective Lemons is paired up with Special Agent Brad Snyder, whom you'll hear from. They were kind of partners throughout this investigation. And it's very open-ended at the beginning. What they're asking for is just give us an account of your day. Give us an account of the last 24 hours. Where have you been? What have you done? And so you'll hear Snyder asking them this. The video is really nothing special. I think it's just ceiling tiles the entire time because the phone is sitting on a table. But the audio is good. You can hear her. And she starts with, we left the dentist and came home. So she does start at the beginning.
So right now, again, we're sorry for everything. I mean, we can't imagine the emotions that you're feeling right now. But it's difficult. Just, when she's kind of thinking about the last 24 hours, and just kind of give me, what she's been through in the past 24 hours. So we'll talk 24 hours would be this time yesterday. So from about 1 o'clock yesterday, just want to tell me your
Just get in the wisdom tooth pulled.
So that's the start. I was leaving the dentist, getting my wisdom tooth pulled. And the end is the Origel story, the Chevron Origel story that she has as her last trip of the night. Again, she omitted that to Wilkins, is now had to come up with a story to cover this trip.
What was really bothering me about almost 1 in the morning, I called Circle K to see if they had Origel. No. So I got to call them about another one of my friends named Misty that I used to work with. He has a lot of mouth problems, and asked her if she had any Origel. I met her up there at the Chevron. And I called her and got back and back home. Also, 12 minutes. I got it for my Life 360. I can show y'all right around everything was on the left else I hear back. Get home, turn my mouth, check all the kids again, they were okay.
Now, a couple things about this initial interview in which she's asked to give an account of didn't want to talk about what she was doing that night in the state that it put her in. So that's omitted completely from this interview. And now she's put a name to the friend who gave her the Orajel. Misty is what she calls her. Now, I'll tell you before we move on from that, I'll tell you this. The police asked her to go through her phone, and of course she's playing, the victim. I'm the victim, the mother victim of a child abduction. So she probably feels some pressure to cooperate. And so she lets them go through her phone. A couple things I see is there's no call to Misty. And there's no call to Circle K to check and see if they have Orajel, which is something she said. First I called Circle K to check and see whether they had Orajel. They didn't, so then I called Misty. None of that in there at all. They also see a message from the defendant to Danny. We looked at this earlier. This is when she's leaving the Circle K and is about to go to the drug dealer at 10:30. Going to run to 204, I guess. This is something that she had left out in this initial interview with Snyder and Lemons. So they interview her again, and this time it's in the interview room. And they want to ask her, what's the deal with this 204 thing? Here's what she tells them. Oh, yeah, that was a trip to the drug dealer, but it wasn't actually to buy drugs. She tells them that the reason that she left the house at 10:30 at night and went to her drug dealer and was there for 10 minutes was simply to pay off a pre-existing drug debt in the amount of $20. Now, the evidence will show that that story is just absurd on its face. But in addition to that, the cash out was for $80, not $20. And she'll later admit that this story wasn't true. But here she is launching it.
Yeah, and I was already heading back by the time that.
So at 10:40, you texted him that you were turning on 204 to go meet with?
Yeah, like I'm turning on 204 now, like I'm about to meet him. That's what I was trying to tell him. So.
And at that point, you didn't get anything.
No, I just paid him $20. I gave him $20 and I left. It was a couple days ago.
She's paying off a $20 debt, not actually buying drugs. Because after all, she tells them, other than marijuana, I don't use drugs.
See, you didn't get a Percocet for red. You were out there.
No. I just gave him $20. And even if I didn't get a Percocet, I'd get $35. That's the last time I asked him. Asked him? I was $6. I don't do it like that. Like, if anything, anybody got to worry about anything with me, it's on me. Because that was me. I'll be honest about that. Everything else, no. I always do that. I wash their meat. Because, I always get covered in police and touch. So I say, anything that's not homegrown or bought at a convenience store, I don't want. When I get homegrown, I don't need cooked up stuff when I got hurt.
Very strong, detailed denial of the use of any drugs other than marijuana. And the reason they're asking her whether she got a Percocet from the drug dealer that night is that they had seen some messages about buying Percocets as well when they went through her phone. And they asked her about that. What about these text messages with you? Look like you're buying Percocet, using Percocet. And her story at this time is, oh, those are for a friend. I'm just the middleman for my friend Cheyenne, who likes Percocets but doesn't, I guess, know a dealer herself.
Things that you just got to answer for, so we have to get a better understanding as to what went on. You know that we gave us the authorization to go through the text messages. There's text messages in there unless you purchasing Percocet as recently as within the past 24 to 48 hours. You mind telling me about that? Is that dated or help me understand that?
I don't think that is dated. So.
What's your story?
Sometimes when you're asking me if I've done it, I haven't done it recently.
attributed directly to the state of mind that she was in and relates so closely to her killing Quentin in the middle of the night. So she feels that she has to tell these lines. And she wants to focus on 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. because after all, this is an abduction. It's not as though I did anything in the middle of the night. My child was taken after Danny left for work. That's her story. That's what she's trying to sell. And again, she forcefully denies this.
No, I did not. I did not take a burger step right now. I will piss in the cup for you right now.
Now, police follow up. Okay, at October 5th, they get statements from the defendant, and she's making all these claims that we've talked about. They get a statement from Paul. They get a statement from Danny. And what you do, and this goes late into the night. Eventually, it's kind of time to stop on October 5th. And wake up in the morning and follow up on some of this stuff. So she has said that she was at the Chevron getting Orajel from Misty, her former co-worker. And so they go out and there are two real notable things that happen between the October 5th statements on day one and the next interview. And one is that they do what they call a video canvas. They go out to this Chevron area where she has said that this Orajel exchange happened. And they look around and they see if they see any cameras. They go in and they ask if there's footage. And they get footage from the Chevron. And it does not show her stopping there. In fact, it shows her driving by. And they get footage from Azalea next door. And this is a major break in the case, because what the Azalea footage shows is her pulling in, doing a loop around the complex, and pulling up to the dumpsters and sitting there for about 2 minutes. And that's when she throws Quentin's body away. So you're going to hear in detail about the footage from Azalea, the different cameras and camera angles and what you could see on which one. But this is just a sample of that. And this is her driving in the Dodge Journey after 1 a.m. on a mission to throw away her dead child. So that's one notable item of follow-up that leads into the next interview. The other is that they go talk to Melissa Missy Bray. The defendant's calling her Misty on the first night. She doesn't even get her name right. But she describes her as a former co-worker from Bojangles. So Special Agent Snyder goes out to Bojangles, asks whether they could direct him to this person. They do. He goes out and he interviews her. And he asks her when the last time that she saw the defendant was. And she tells him, I haven't seen her for months. The last time that I saw her was when she ran it. It was like in July of 2022, months before what we're talking about. The defendant had run out of gas near Missy's house and walked to Missy's house and had borrowed a gas can. And their last contact was Missy texting her a few times saying, hey, can I get that gas can back? And that was it. And that was months before. And Special Agent Snyder looked at these messages and they corroborate what Missy is telling him. So, Chevron story, the met Missy at Chevron story is now just completely torpedoed. And so they bring her in for another interview on October 8th. And this one is with an FBI agent named Bridget Brock. And it's conducted at the FBI office in Savannah. And they confront her with these two findings. One, the security footage from Azalea and from Chevron. And two, what Missy has told them. And she just sticks to the Orajel story and just insists that it is true. And this is what that sounded like. She just hasn't had time yet to figure out how she's going to play this with this new information that they're presenting her with.
We'll talk about that, okay?
October 12th, she comes in for another interview. And this is with Brad Snyder, who I've talked about already, who you've heard a little bit from and seen a little bit of, and an FBI agent named Savannah Solomon that he works with closely. And this is at the FBI office. And this is a long interview. I've pared it down a little bit so we don't have to spend 3 hours watching it during the trial, but it's still fairly long. And initially, at least, she's sticking to the Orangeville story. That's Savannah Solomon on the left, Snyder on the right, and the defendant in the middle.
And I did,
I did meet Misty, 100%. It happened. I'm telling you. And she tells this kind of flowery story describing this meeting. She lavishes them with details about how this went down.
So you went to Missy's house, and did you go inside her house? She was just standing outside. How long did y'all interact there with Missy? How long did y'all?
2-3 minutes. It was a quick little conversation. You don't know her mouth doing this one. She does some crack and stuff. So she did how much she was outside.
Now she has Misty was smoking crack when she gave the defendant the Orangeville. And what is going on here is when the defendant is lying and telling a story to cover something up that she did.
Objection, Your Honor, at this point in time. This is opening statements. Mr. Dean has the right to say what he expects the evidence to show, not his interpretation of it. So,
Sustained. Mr. Kingdom, can I ask you to move forward?
the evidence will show that she added this detail to suggest a faulty memory on Misty's part. To suggest that, maybe this will help explain why Misty is telling him she hadn't seen me. And it is nothing to her to just accuse Missy, of having smoked crack during this meeting that didn't happen. But in any case, a few minutes later, she finally admits that she didn't see Missy.
She's got to understand that you look like to be 100% truthful. 100%. That's the only way that we're going to take it out.
Speak the truth. I didn't tell her anyone else to just follow us.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Because
If the light was on, we're not going to do it.
did you do any work about tonight?
I did do it the other
What
night.
did you do with
But I found it, and the card was one of the ones that I lost. And I found it when I got back to the house.
So after insisting on the 5th, she met Misty at the Chevron from Orangeville, and after insisting on the 8th,
I
that was the
can.
truth,
Can
and
you hear
after
me?
insisting even at the outset of this interview that it
Yeah,
was
hey,
true,
mic check, mic check.
she
Mic
finally
check, ready for
admits that it
news
wasn't
at
true.
noon.
and
It's gonna be so crazy and so
massages
fun.
the
Never
inconsistency
knew.
by
So
saying,
cool.
I didn't speak to
Yeah,
her,
thank you.
but I did go there with the intent of seeing her. And she adds a detail that hasn't been included in any of her stories to date. Oh, and by the way, you've asked me if I threw any trash away there. Yeah, I did throw some trash away. She has a story for what that trash was. The evidence will show she did not want to admit that it was Quentin's body. So she describes this trash that she threw away as stinky shrimp pasta that had been sitting in the car in a trash bag and smelling up the car.
It was just a little kind of trash. Yeah, they were the trash. He's staying with us to drive down a few days ago, and there's full of food all in my car. So I pulled around and seen my gas talking to people in the trash. There's quarts like shrimp pasta.
Shrimp pasta?
Yeah. The whole car smelled like shrimp. Yeah, that was right down in there. So, what is that smell? I felt that before I even went to go to a floor. I go up there, I'm like, get out of there.
And they ask her about this. Gosh, This is the most critical fact in the case. Throwing Quentin's body in the dumpster at Azalea, what she was doing at Azalea Mobile Home Plaza at 1:17 in the morning or so. And her explanation for that is, it's just such a minor thing, throwing away some trash. I didn't think to mention it in my hours of previous interviews.
I feel stuck. I feel stuck. I didn't think anything of, to be honest. It's just, food, up in the car, see an opportunity to do it out.
She does not want to talk about what was in that trash bag. They also revisit the drug use, and you'll remember the strong denials on October 5th, which are repeated on October 8th. On this October 12th interview, she admits finally that, I did take a Percocet that night.
And you had a Percocet in conjunction with smoking?
Yes, that's what I want. That's like at home. When I started to smoke a cigarette.
And about what time would you have done that?
By the time I got home, I took it like 11 something or whatever.
And so Snyder asked her about her changing story. You've been adamant that you met Misty for Oragel, and now you're finally admitting to us, I actually didn't speak to her. You've initially, over the course of 2 interviews, maybe more, didn't mention throwing trash away. And now you've got a very detailed account about doing that and what it was. And you, on the 5th, were adamant that you hadn't used any drugs other than marijuana. And now you're telling us that you did take a Percocet too. What's going on? Why is the story changing? And her explanation for that is, my faulty memory might have something to do with all the cocaine I was doing that night, which is a drug that had totally been absent from all of her prior accounts and fits much more with the $80 cash app than the story about paying off the drug front. And so she is explaining her inconsistent stories by adding another inconsistency, which is an admission to cocaine use.
You requested a short break, and that makes sense. Let's take a 10-minute break and resume with the opening statement. Mr. Dean, again, I'm going to ask you not to talk about the case, don't do any research about the case, avoid conversations about the case. The time now is about 11:29. Let's aim to be back here at 11:40. Okay, we're in recess.
So if you are joining us, court is in recess. You saw Judge Stokes mention the time was about 11:29. That's because we are operating on a 30-minute delay with this trial. So we will take this moment to take the break, and when it comes back, we'll continue with this live stream. So stay tuned. Make sure you have that WTOC News app so you can get a push alert when they return. Again, we are on a 30-minute delay at the request of the judge.
We are back on the order, back on the record in SBCR 22-03364J6.
We are going to take you back to the live stream of this trial. One thing to note before we do get started, we are on a 30-minute delay, but we do know coming up there will be some graphic imagery that may be shown in the courtroom, so that's a warning for you guys as you continue to watch this case. But we'll go back to this live stream for Leilani Simon.
No, Your Honor, I'm ready to continue.
Not from the defense yet.
All right, let's proceed.
Jury's entering.
Okay, thank you. And so for the record, the jurors are all back. They are being seated at this time. All right, all 16. Thank you, and Mr. Dean will resume with his opening statement.
So, October 12th, and we've come a long way from the October 5th account of only using marijuana that night. This is where we end up on October 12th.
Just before we left, we were taking the trash survey. You had cooking, oil,
And in this interview, she acknowledges that this wasn't like the one night she used cocaine. She's a regular user of cocaine, which she had denied in earlier interviews. Now, at the end of the day, the most critical thing though is what happened to Quentin. What happened to Quentin in the middle of the night. And here is what she had to say about that. I don't know if I did something to him, but if I did, I will take responsibility. She appears to be claiming something like a lack of memory, and I'll tell you that the evidence that you'll see is going to show that when she drove to those dumpsters at Azalea to throw Quentin's body away, you can see that she's driving normally. You'll see that she comes to a complete stop at stop signs. She uses her turn signal. You'll hear evidence that the investigators could tell from her phone that she plugged her phone into the USB charger in the car when she got in. So the evidence will show that she was aware of what she was doing when she took him there, and that her claims to just not know what happened cannot be true. They do not fit with the other evidence. We've talked a lot about what she has been saying to the police and the FBI on the 5th, on the 8th, on the 12th. But we haven't talked much about the other aspect of the investigation, which is the effort to find Quentin and to figure out exactly what happened to him. So I'll talk a little bit about that now. Now, on October 18th, police announced that they believe Quentin's body to be in a local landfill, and that they're about to begin this extremely challenging needle in a haystack search of the landfill. And this is how they got there. A detective with the Chatham County Police Department goes out to the mobile home plaza once these dumpsters become an area of interest after they've looked at the security footage. And he asks what garbage truck company services these dumpsters, and they give him that information. He gets in touch with that garbage truck company, and he learns that it was truck 309 from a 3909, I should say, from a company called Waste Pro. This is the list of stops for that truck on that day. Serviced the mobile home plaza. This is on the morning of October 5th, actually. Quentin wasn't in the dumpster for very long because it was empty that day. And this, what I'll tell you next, kind of goes to explain Quentin's condition when they ultimately found him. Not an intact body, but in pieces, little pieces, bones. So front-loading garbage truck extends its hydraulic forks into the slots on the side of the dumpster and drops Quentin and all the other garbage into the box in the back of the truck. There's a compactor in that truck that compacts everything. You want that compactor in there so that the truck doesn't have to go to the landfill as frequently. It makes the garbage smaller and take more garbage. That truck went to the Waste Management Superior Landfill on Little Neck Road on the morning of October 5th. This is a landfill ticket. They weigh the trucks when they're coming in. That's how they know how much to charge the garbage truck company for this particular load. This is for Waste Pro truck, 3909. And with this information, the detectives go out and they talk to the landfill manager, and he's able to identify the area that garbage was being dumped and then kind of shoved to on October 5th. And this kind of general area up here, that becomes the search area. So they have kind of an idea of like a general box in the landfill of where Quentin is going to be found. But this is still an extremely difficult thing. Even if you know the general area, there's like 2 more days of trash that have since been dumped there since the 5th. And this stuff gets compacted and moved around. They drive these compactors over it that have studded metal rollers. And everything just gets shredded. You may have this idea that you go into a landfill and it's just like a pile of bags of trash, just like they were when you put them in your garbage can at home. It is not like that. You will see that it is not like that. Everything is shredded because compaction is the name of the game in landfills. You will hear that. You got to get everything pressed down real tight because space is money. So at the end of the day, they have tons and tons of garbage to search through. And so they arrange the landfill search. They have some consultants from an outside agency come in and advise on this because it's a very technical thing. These consultants are able to tell them, based on the size of the box, about how many tons of trash they'll have to search through to exhaust the area, based on known rates of searching, like pounds per day. They're able to give them an estimate of how many people this is going to take and how much time it's going to take. They have to order specialized protective gear, steel-toed boots, Tyvek suits, respirators, gloves to put over the gloves. This is a biohazard environment. And they have to find volunteers, and this is an all-volunteer duty. Right? And for weeks, volunteers from the police department and from some other law enforcement agencies came out here early in the morning, and they do this landfill search that involves an excavator up in the search area, scooping up garbage, putting it in a dump truck. Dump truck comes down on this open area bounded by cones that they call the search deck. Excavator down here kind of spreads the garbage, that particular load, I think they were calling them lines, out onto the search deck. And the law enforcement officers, these volunteers, get online with rakes, and they just search through it. This is what that looked like. And they do this for days, weeks, in the heat. All that year on. That's why I said earlier, these efforts can only be described as heroic. They want to find Quentin. The evidence will show that these things are not typically successful. There's a very low success rate with these landfill searches because, again, it's a needle in a haystack proposition. But that's what the police are doing while she is playing games with investigators and changing her story and changing her story again. October 24th, while the landfill search is underway, and those volunteers are suffering in the heat out there, not knowing whether the next raid is going to bring more tedium and boredom, or if it's going to bring the horror of what they're actually looking for. The defendant is still playing games. Having already admitted that she went to Azalea and threw away trash, but it was only stinky shrimp pasta, she does an interview with the news, WTOC, in which she still, even at this late stage, this is October 24th, that's 19 days after the initial 911 call, and after several interviews where her story has just been shot to pieces. She does this interview where she holds herself out as the victim of a child abduction, still on that, and has the gall to make an appeal to the public to just please bring Quentin home safe. And the evidence will show that she knows he's not safe. And she knows he's not coming home.
My kids woke up to me screaming, "Where's Quentin?" and running through the house. I ran and looked everywhere, inside, outside, so screaming for help. I've been here every day since this. I am not running and I'm not hiding. And if something does come up that I am at fault, I will take myself to that police station. And I'll walk there. All we want is justice for Quentin's life. That's it. We want justice to him. We want answers.
We don't care the cost.
We want answers just like everybody else does. At the end of it all, we love you, baby Q. My little monkey, and we want him home.
That same day in which she's claiming to the news to have no idea what happened and to just want him home, she sends this text message to Savannah Solomon of the FBI. And this is just the latest Hail Mary. After all the statements about going to the Chevron and then going to Azalea and what she was doing there, and I was actually throwing away trash and not Quentin, at this point, October 24th, the same day as that news interview, she and Danny are split at this point. He kind of seems to see the writing on the wall for her and has left town, I believe, and I think they're not together at this point. And so now's the perfect time to try to put it on Danny. I'm not lying for Danny anymore. The reason why my story about Oragel and shit didn't make sense was because Danny told me to say that he was the one who left, and my phone was in the car from my previous trip. And the reason she says that is her phone GPS puts her at the dumpsters too, not just the video. So anyway, she's throwing it on Danny and is now saying, you know what, I didn't actually make that trip. Well, that's him, not me. And they get her in for an interview a couple days later to formalize that statement. And they just sort of let her talk and put it out there. But the evidence will show that it was clearly not true. It was a desperate attempt to just try something new after, I don't know, a dozen lies to that point. And that interview was on October 31st, last day in October. Now on November 18th, about 3 or 4 weeks after they started searching through that landfill, this arduous task, challenging thing, all volunteers, they finally find what they're looking for. November 18th is a memorable day for the people who are involved in this landfill search. because they find Quentin, and he's not in good shape. Okay, they find him in pieces. Mostly bones, a foot. It's not as though he's in one place on that search deck. They're finding bones in different lines, spread out. He's torn apart. They send Quentin's remains up to the FBI lab at Quantico, Virginia, where DNA analysis is done. And they confirm what everybody already knew, is that this is Quentin. And the defendant comes in for one last interview. So that's where she ends up. After having given this very detailed cover story about going to the Chevron to meet Misty for Oragel, and having added this later, this richly detailed account of having thrown away some garbage at Azalea in the dumpster, but it only being shrimp pasta. Her final story, when they found Quentin after tracing the trash and making it undeniable that what she was throwing away in that dumpster at Azalea was her son's body, the best she could do in her last interview is to claim a total and complete lack of memory from seeing him in his pack and play at 10-something to snapping back into consciousness on the way home from Azalea. And we'll watch it, you'll see more specifically what she says happened is that she was driving home, hit a set of railroad tracks, and that jolted her back into now forming memories again. That's the story she ends up with. After those richly detailed accounts of false statements for what happened during that trip, now she just can't remember anything that happened during the critical time period in this case. The murder and the disposal of the body. So, that is, as concise as I can make it, the account of what happened and what how the investigation unfolded. What will the trial look like? Okay, so that's kind of the story, start to finish. What will the trial look like? Trial's not like an opening statement. All right, we bring witnesses in one at a time. It can be kind of disjointed and choppy because each individual comes in and they can only talk about really their role and what they did, heard, saw, that sort of thing. You will hear from some of the responding officers. You'll hear from people like Michelle McCarta, people in Quentin's life that can tell you some things about how the defendant felt about Quentin and treated him. You'll hear from the investigators who took these statements and followed up on them. You'll hear from some of the people who were involved in this search of the landfill. You'll hear from some of the scientists at Quantico who were tasked with identifying Quentin and seeing what they could make of these remains, which are just totally torn apart. What I do not expect you will hear is exactly how the defendant killed Quentin. And that's because she covered it up. It's because she got rid of the body. All right? The evidence will show that her specific intent from the outset was that he never be found at all. And him being found in pieces, little bitty pieces, was the next best thing. The judge will tell you that in a case like this, we do not have to prove exactly how the defendant killed Quentin. Under these circumstances, how could you? And that is a sensible rule. Because what we have to prove, what is important, is not exactly how she killed him, but that she killed him. The fact that she did it. And the evidence that we will present to you will do that. It will do that, beyond a reasonable doubt. So at the end of the case, when all the evidence is in, we will make our closing arguments, and we will ask you to find her guilty of all of the charges in the indictment. I want to thank you for your attention. This has been a fairly long opening statement, but it was important to us, because it's our one chance to do it, is to give you kind of soup to nuts from the outset. What is this case about, and what did this investigation look like? So I thank you for your attention.
All right, thank you, Mr. Dean. Turn to the defense. Does the defense wish to make an opening statement?
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't intend to speak nearly as long as Mr. Dean did. Because frankly, this whole case is about rumor, gossip, speculation, and innuendo, and ultimately, the state's bold conclusions about what they say happened but can't prove. Unquestionably, this is an emotional case. I know that. I have 5 children, 4 grandchildren. So I understand how emotional this can be. But this case can't be decided based on emotions. It has to be decided on facts and evidence presented in this courtroom. It can't be determined by emotions or their rumors and their gossip and their conclusions. And in the end, what you will determine is that's exactly the foundation of the state's claims. Bunch of conclusions, bunch of declarations, unsupported by actual evidence. These declarations about she did this at 1 o'clock, she killed Quentin. She drove here, and then all of that are their conclusions, what they have decided the evidence shows. But what is important in a trial is this witness stand, where witnesses testify and evidence is presented. It's not what some lawyer says. It's not what the state declares the evidence to be, and that includes this discussion about the statements. Mr. Dean has his ideas of what those statements represent, but that's your job. And it's not to simply rely on the state's conclusions about what they mean. The state has a conclusion. The core conclusion is that Leilani Marie Simon murdered her child. The evidence will simply not support that bold conclusion. That is why, after we've heard all the evidence and all the argument, the evidence will lead you to one place, and that is a finding with respect to murder and concealing the death of another of not guilty. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Purse. This would probably be a good time to break for lunch, and then we'll resume testimony after the lunch break. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a time for lunch break. It is, the time now is 12:10. I'm going to ask that you report back at 1:20, We got to give some time for them to get to lunch and get back. Let's go ahead and make that 1:30. It's 12:15 now. Let's make it 1:30. That'll give some time. I want to be realistic about what we do. When you go, please remember not to discuss the case, not to do any research on the case, and not to talk with each other about the case. All right? And with that, you're excused.
Jury's exiting.
Thank you for joining us. We just heard from Judge Tammy Stokes that they are breaking for lunch in this trial. She mentioned that they would return around 1:30. This is on a 30-minute delay, so that'll be around 2 p.m. for the live stream. We will stay live. You can come right back to this link, but they are breaking for lunch in the Leilani Simon trial. You can follow all of the coverage on our website, WTOC.com. I'll show you just quickly how you can see all of the coverage. Just give me 1 second to bring this up. So on our website, you can see everything from this case. We have a full timeline of this story as well on our website that you can track all the way back to September of 2022. So make sure to stay tuned both online and on air for the latest information on this. Again, they are breaking for lunch. We are on a 30-minute delay at the request of the judge. So we will stay live. Just make sure to tune back in around 2 p.m. when they're expected to return.
Is Court Exhibit 2. Despite her showing the document, which really indicates to me that there is speech understanding in background noise with